The control room behind the stage at Caldwell Motion Technologies hummed with the kind of tension that comes before a launch worth millions. Banks of monitors threw blue light across the faces of engineers who had not slept in 2 days. Cables snaked along the floor. Headsets crackled with the chatter of stage managers counting down the final minutes before the curtain lifted on the company's most ambitious self-driving prototype. Elias Parker stood quietly near the auxiliary power board, in the corner where no one expected him to be heard. He was 29 years old, 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a face that had once known easier years. His shirt was clean, but creased at the collar. His work boots were scuffed from 100 jobs that nobody remembered. In one hand he held a service radio. The other hand rested gently on the small shoulder of his daughter. Matilda Parker was 6 to run a line. She stood very close to her father, the way a child does when she senses adult fear in a room she does not understand. Her brown hair was tied back with a ribbon that had seen too many washes. Her yellow sweater was the color of late afternoon. In her arms she carried a small blue toy car with a chipped roof, the last gift her mother had ever given her. For most of the morning, Elias had heard nothing unusual. But 15 minutes earlier, when the prototype rolled into its staging bay, a faint irregular vibration began to ride beneath the polished hum of the battery cooling fans. To anyone else it sounded like a machine working hard. To a man who had once rebuilt electric drivetrains for a living, it sounded like the cough of someone hiding a fever. He moved toward the lead technician and asked, calmly, if the demo mode could be paused for a manual raycheck. The technician barely looked up, so Elias asked to speak with whoever was in charge. Carter Briggs frowned the moment Elias stepped into the central coordination zone. Serafina Caldwell turned, her champagne flute halfway to her mouth, and assessed him the way a buyer assesses a chair she did not order. She was 28. The kind of beautiful that had been engineered by stylists and reinforced by board meetings, with chestnut hair falling over the dark V of her dress. Elias did not waste her time. He said the prototype needed 3 minutes off automatic demo mode for a manual sweep. He said the rear cooling fan was uneven. He said someone needed to be stationed at the mechanical kill switch behind the stage before the rotation began. The room paused. Carter let out a tight, dismissive breath, and Serafina laughed. It was not loud, but it was the kind of laugh that turned a man into a joke in front of his own daughter. You think a contract wiring tech understands this car better than my engineering team? She asked. Matilda lowered her head. Elias looked at his daughter, then back at the CEO, and his voice did not rise. If I'm wrong, you lose 3 minutes. If I'm right, you keep the whole company. Hours earlier, the morning had begun in a small apartment on the far edge of town. The light had been the gentle gray of a late autumn dawn, and the kitchen smelled of cheap coffee and the slightly burned edges of toast. Elias moved with the practiced quiet of a man who had been alone with a child for 3 years. He cracked 2 eggs into a pan and set out a plate with a fork on a folded napkin. He checked the calendar pinned to the refrigerator door, the one that listed Matilda's school pickups, his contract shifts, and the pediatrician appointment circled in red pen for the following Friday. Today's square held only one line, written in capital letters: Caldwell Motion Launch. His wife had died 3 years earlier on a stretch of highway slick with November rain. He had not stopped working since. He had also not stopped grieving, but he had learned to carry it alongside everything else a single father carries. Today's job mattered. If he performed well at the Caldwell event, the staffing agency had hinted at a long-term contract. Long-term meant health insurance. Long-term meant Matilda might transfer to the better elementary school across town. Long-term meant the box of unopened bills under the sink might one day be empty. Then the phone rang. The babysitter, apologetic and feverish, said she could not come. Elias closed his eyes for one long second, then opened them and smiled at his daughter as if the morning were still fine. He helped Matilda into her yellow sweater. He brushed her hair with the patience that only fathers of small daughters seem to possess. He fastened the ribbon she always insisted on, even though it was old. He told her she would have to come with him today, and that she would need to sit very still in a room behind a stage. She nodded, grave as a small judge. In the car, she looked up from her blue toy and asked, "Daddy, are you really going to fix a car today?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Just checking a few things, sweetheart. They have a lot of very good engineers there." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "But you're good too." He had to look at the road for a while before he could answer. He had once believed he could be many things. After his wife died, he had narrowed his ambitions to only this: be a good father, pay the rent, do not ask the world for kindness it does not owe. He squeezed the steering wheel and said, softly, "Thank you, baby." The Caldwell Motion Technologies showroom stood on the polished side of the city, where glass rose so high it seemed to hold the clouds in place. The lobby was enormous and quiet, in the way only money can be quiet. Light reflected off marble. A sculpture of a wheel hung suspended in the air as if it had escaped gravity. Serafina Caldwell walked through that lobby like a woman who had memorized every angle. Assistants stepped aside without being told. Engineers straightened their collars when she passed. She did not need to raise her voice. She had learned, very young, that silence properly placed moved more weight than shouting. She was 28, and the press had already named her one of the youngest chief executives in the industry. The article had used the word ruthless twice and the word brilliant once. This morning's launch was not simply a product reveal. It was a referendum. The board had grown impatient with the prototype's delays. Investors had grown nervous. Two competitors had begun whispering about acquisitions. If the self-driving sedan rolled out of its staging bay and onto the rotating platform without trouble, Serafina would buy herself another 12 months of loyalty. If anything went wrong, she might not be sitting in this building by Christmas. Carter Briggs followed half a step behind her, the way a courtier follows a queen. He was the head of engineering, and he had been preparing the technical narrative for weeks. He told her the simulations had run flawlessly. He told her the battery had passed thermal stress tests. He told her the steering algorithm had been hardened against every edge case that human imagination could supply. She listened, and she believed him. She believed him not only because of his data, but because he wore the right suit and held the right credentials. He spoke the language of her boardroom and did not arrive in scuffed boots. This was the quiet flaw in Serafina Caldwell. She was not foolish, and not cruel by intention. She had simply learned to trust the surface of a person before she examined the depth, because in her industry, the surface usually told you the truth fast enough to act. A young assistant offered her a clipboard. She signed without reading. Outside, the audience was settling into chairs, lifting glasses of sparkling water, nodding at one another with the careful smiles of people who had paid a great deal to be impressed. Serafina checked her reflection one final time in the chrome panel of an elevator door. She liked what she saw. She did not yet know that within 40 minutes, she would run through this lobby with her hair loose and a single father's name on her lips. Backstage, the staging bay was a tunnel of cool blue light. The prototype sedan sat on a low dolly, its surface so dark it seemed to drink the air around it. Technicians moved around the car like priests around an altar. They spoke in shorthand and tapped tablets. They confirmed checklists with the small, confident nods of professionals who had done this before. Elias had been assigned to the auxiliary power board. His job on paper was simple: verify the supplemental load circuits. Confirm that the stage lighting did not draw current through the wrong relays. Watch the indicator panel and call it in if anything blinked red. Nothing about the actual vehicle was officially his concern, but the auxiliary board sat 8 feet from the prototype. And as the demo mode came online, his ear caught it. It was a small thing, a tiny mismatch in the rhythm of the rear battery cooling fans. Most of the technicians could not have heard it through their headsets. To Elias, who had spent 6 years on a high-performance European drivetrain team before his daughter was born, the sound was as obvious as a bell. He stepped closer. He crouched. He looked at the slim gap beneath the chassis, where heat patterns rose in faint shimmering lines. The battery casing was warmer than it should have been at idle. The cooling fan on the right was spinning a fraction slower than its twin. On the auxiliary panel above, A small indicator for the stage synchronization signal flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. A young technician with thick glasses passed by. Elias asked him, casually, "Did your team push a software update last night?" The young man stopped. "Yeah. They synced the demo routine to the new lighting and rotation system." "Why? Have they run the full load test? All of it together? Lights, rotation, audio, investor stream climate?" The technician hesitated. He guessed they had tested in pieces. "The full integrated load? Not yet, not under a live floor." Elias closed his eyes for 1 second. He had seen this exact pattern years before, in a research garage on the other side of the country. A battery cooling system performed cleanly under partial load. Then someone added the final variable, and the timing slipped, and the car forgot how to listen to itself. This was not a software bug that would crash a screen. This was the moment when the machine and the operator stopped agreeing on reality. He stood up slowly. He told the young technician, in a voice that was deliberate but not loud, that the prototype needed to come off automatic demo mode for 3 minutes. They needed a manual sweep. They needed a body posted at the mechanical kill switch behind the rotating stage. The young man's eyes widened. "I don't have authority to call that." Elias looked at the steady, blinking signal one more time. "Then take me to whoever does." The control room was busy in that specific way that mistakes love. Everyone was moving, but nobody was watching the same thing. Carter Briggs stood near the central console, explaining to a small group of investor-side engineers why this rollout would redefine the category. Serafina was checking her cue card for the opening line of her keynote. The door opened, and the temperature of the room shifted as Elias walked in with a small girl half a step behind him. Heads turned. Nobody asked Matilda why she was there. They simply registered her existence and disapproved of it. Elias did not soften his voice. He did not apologize for taking up space. He spoke in the clean, short sentences that men who fix things use when they want to be understood quickly. "The vehicle," he said, "needed to come off automatic demo mode. It needed 3 minutes of manual verification. The cooling fan on the right rear had a desynchronization that did not appear on the primary readouts but did appear in the ambient signature." He said the new software push had not been validated under integrated stage load. He said someone needed to be at the mechanical kill switch behind the rotating platform before the demonstration began. Carter laughed first. It was a short, professional laugh, the kind a man uses when he wants to make sure the room knows he is not threatened. "With respect," Carter said, "you are applying garage shop intuition to a self-driving platform that has run thousands of certified simulations." Elias did not argue with the word intuition. He looked at the auxiliary display behind Carter and pointed. "Your primary readouts are clean. Your secondary sync is slipping. If it locks during stage rotation, your touch interface won't respond." "What's your manual contingency?" Carter said the company had emergency protocols. "Do those protocols," Elias asked, "require software response?" For 1 full second, Carter said nothing. It was the kind of silence that should have made every adult in the room stop and turn. It should have made Serafina put down her cue card. It should have made the investor-side engineers exchange glances. But Serafina was thinking about the timer. She was thinking about the press in the front rows. She was thinking about her own mother, who had told her at 19 that the world only forgives men for hesitation. She turned to Elias and asked, almost politely, what department he worked under. He told her. Contract auxiliary power. Day shift. Through the agency. The mood in the room realigned with a small, almost audible click. The warning was no longer information. It became insubordination. Serafina Caldwell did not lose composure often. She had been raised by a woman who corrected posture at the dinner table and a father who corrected diction at the breakfast table. She had learned, before she was a teenager, that authority was a thing one performed in public, so that one would not have to defend it in private. So when she felt her own patience slip, she did not show it as anger. She showed it as amusement. She tilted her head at Elias, and let her mouth curl into something almost friendly. Let me make sure I understand. You think a contract wiring technician hired by the day, has caught something my entire engineering team missed." Elias did not answer. He had nothing to add to a sentence that was already a trap. A few staff members chuckled, the kind of small obedient laughter that follows a powerful person into rooms whether or not it is invited. Carter saw the opening and walked through it. "We're not going to halt a multi-million-dollar product launch," Carter said, "because of a hunch from a guy who brought his kid to a job site." Matilda's small face changed. She did not cry. She did not whimper. She simply looked down at the toes of her shoes, and her grip on the blue toy car tightened until her knuckles paled. Something in Elias went very still. He could survive being called a wiring tech. He could survive being called a hunch. He had survived worse adjectives in worse years. But the moment Carter pulled Matilda into the joke, a quiet line crossed inside him that no one else in that room could see. He spoke, and his voice was lower now, but very clear. "My daughter is not part of this conversation, and the prototype out there does not care about anyone's title. If the system locks, it will lock." Serafina heard the change in his tone. She also heard in some deeper part of herself the truth of his sentence. But she had been challenged in front of her staff and her chief engineer, with an audience already filling the chairs beyond the door. She had been raised to never, ever step backward in public. She turned to security. "Please escort the gentleman and his daughter out of the technical area." Then to a clipboard assistant, almost in passing, "Notify the staffing agency. We won't be requiring his services again." The words were said the way one cancels a catering order. Matilda lifted her head and looked at her father with the searching, frightened expression of a child trying to understand whether the adults in the room had stopped following the rules. Elias did not argue. He picked up her small jacket from the stool where she had laid it. He took her hand. He did not look at Serafina again. He walked his daughter out of the control room with a steadiness that, in retrospect, would haunt every person who watched him go. The corridor outside the control room was long and empty. The carpet was so deep that footsteps fell into it without a sound. Distant music from the stage check seeped through the walls, soft and triumphant. Matilda walked beside her father and did not let go of his hand. After a dozen steps, she asked the question that he had been afraid she would ask. "Daddy, did you do something wrong?" Elias stopped walking. He knelt down on one knee in the middle of that long, empty hallway. He set her jacket aside. He took her small face in both of his hands and looked at her the way he had looked at her on the night her mother died, when he had promised her that the world could still be a safe place even when it broke. "No, sweetheart. I didn't do anything wrong." She studied him. Why did the lady laugh? He thought for a long moment. He did not want to give her bitterness. He did not want her to grow up believing that the powerful were always cruel and the gentle were always overlooked. He chose his words slowly. Sometimes grown-ups look at a person's clothes before they listen to their words. It's not fair. But it doesn't mean the words are wrong. She nodded, the way she nodded when he explained the reason behind a rule she did not enjoy. "But you were right," she said. "Right, Daddy." He hesitated. Then he answered with the kind of honesty that small children deserve more often than they receive. "I hope I'm wrong, baby. Because if I'm right, somebody could get hurt." Matilda thought about that. Then, with the deliberate weight of a 6-year-old making a vow, she said, "I believe you." He held her for a moment. Just a moment. He did not let himself break in front of her. He stood and lifted her jacket back over her shoulders, and they continued toward the elevators. But as they walked, his head turned, just once, toward the closed door of the technical wing. The faint vibration of the cooling fans had not gone away. If anything, in the last 4 minutes, it had grown sharper. He pressed the elevator call button. He waited. He listened. Inside him, 2 voices argued. One said, "You have given them more than they deserved." The other said, "That little girl in your hand is watching how you behave when no one is forcing you to." The elevator chimed. The doors began to open, and somewhere behind him, very faintly, he heard the sound of running footsteps and heels. The lights came up. The opening music swelled, deliberately cinematic, the kind of soundtrack designed to make grown investors feel the future inside their ribs. Serafina Caldwell walked on stage with the confident smile she had practiced in front of a mirror at 5 that morning. She greeted the audience. She thanked the partners. She spoke about a world in which transportation was no longer a chore, but a quiet companion. She said the words mobility, autonomy, and trust. The audience nodded. Cameras tracked her every gesture. Behind her, on the slowly turning stage, the prototype emerged from the wings. For the first 11 seconds, it was perfect. The car glided forward on its hidden rail, found its mark beneath the spotlight, and stopped with a soft mechanical exhale. The audience applauded. A photographer crouched lower to catch the headlamps. Then the car nudged forward 2 inches more than it should have. It was nothing. Nobody noticed. But in the control room, Carter saw it. He saw the position indicator drift a hair past its calibration point and stay there. He pressed his radio and asked his lead technician to recenter through the auto trim routine. The sedan adjusted. It corrected itself. And then it kept correcting. The front wheels turned a fraction of a degree the script had not asked for. The interior dashboard, visible through the tinted windshield, blinked once, then froze on a half-rendered graphic. A technician at a secondary console tried to send an idle command. The interface swallowed the keystroke and did nothing. He tried again. 2 seconds passed in silence that felt like minutes. 2 seconds is a long time when a vehicle is on a rotating stage. Then, with the dreadful slowness of a film projected at half speed, the prototype began to slide. Not lurch. Not crash. Slide. The electronic brake had locked one rear wheel, while the drive motor still received a steady rotation signal from the stage automation. The car was being asked, by 2 different systems, to do 2 different things, and it had chosen to do both at once. It drifted toward the front edge of the elevated platform, where the audience sat in the front row, only 12 feet below. Serafina kept speaking for one more line. Her professional instinct could not yet process what her peripheral vision was telling her. Then, somewhere in the audience, an investor stood up. A photographer lowered his camera. A security guard at the far wall reached for his radio without taking his eyes off the stage. In the control room, Carter shouted at the lead technician to reboot the interface. The technician shouted back that he had already tried. Another engineer suggested cutting power. A third engineer shouted that cutting power would lock the battery into safety hold and freeze the vehicle exactly where it was on the lip, with one wheel almost over the edge. Every modern solution they reached for required software response. And the software was the thing that had stopped responding. Serafina turned, slowly, and saw what was behind her. The smile fell off her face like something physically dropped. She looked back into the wings, toward the small window of the control room glowing dim above the stage. She saw Carter's face inside that window. She saw the panic she had not seen in him in 3 years. And in the silence between her own breaths, she remembered a man in an old shirt, a small girl with a yellow sweater, and a sentence about 3 minutes. The control room had become a different room than it had been 10 minutes earlier. Voices overlapped. A junior engineer was crying very quietly at her console and pretending she was not. Someone had spilled coffee across a printout. A red warning light pulsed above the central monitor in a slow, almost sleepy rhythm, as if the building itself were running out of urgency. Carter Briggs stood at the main console, his hands hovering above the keyboard like a man who could no longer decide which key betrayed him. He typed an emergency override sequence. The screen replied with a polite spinning icon. He typed it again. The icon kept spinning. Another engineer attempted to access the secondary control bus. The signal was out of sync. Yet another suggested deploying the backstage tow rig, but the lead technician shouted that the wheels were locked at an angle, and any sudden pull on the chassis would tip the vehicle off the platform entirely. Every available option lived inside a piece of software, and the software had stopped agreeing to be used. It was the young technician with the thick glasses, the same one Elias had spoken to 40 minutes earlier, who finally raised his voice over the noise. "The man we sent away," he said, the words tumbling out before he could be afraid of them. "He asked us to put someone at the mechanical kill switch behind the rotating stage. He said to do it before we started. The room turned, almost as one, toward the boy. Carter's first reaction was to refuse. He opened his mouth to say no, that they did not need that there were proper channels. But no proper channel had survived the last 60 seconds, and even Carter could hear the difference between his voice and the room. An older lead engineer, a woman with 26 years of factory floors behind her, looked at Carter directly. "If the digital interface is dead," she said, "we have to take the vehicle to mechanical neutral. By hand, the way he described." Those words landed in the room like a confession. Serafina was no longer on stage. She had stepped behind the curtain at the far side, out of sight of the cameras, and she stood now in the doorway of the control room, with one hand pressed flat against the frame as if to keep herself standing. She heard the older engineer. She heard the young technician. She heard, beneath both of them, the calm voice of a man she had laughed at 38 minutes earlier. "If I'm wrong, you lose 3 minutes. If I'm right, you keep the whole company." She had not given him 3 minutes, and now she was about to lose more than a company. She turned and ran. Serafina Caldwell had not run in heels in 11 years. She had once promised herself, at a party in her early 20s, that she would never let any room see her hurry. She broke that promise now, fully, in front of a hallway of confused interns and one very startled florist. The corridor was longer than she remembered. Her hair, which had been arranged for 45 minutes by a stylist that morning, slipped from its discipline and fell across her shoulders. Her left heel struck the marble too hard, and a small chip flew off the back. She did not slow down. She turned the corner, into the elevator vestibule. The elevator doors were open. Elias was already inside, holding his daughter's hand. Matilda was looking up at him, asking him something in a small, private voice. He had pressed the lobby button. The doors had begun their slow inward glide. Serafina threw out her hand and stopped them with her palm. "Mr. Parker." He turned. He was not surprised to see her. There was no triumph in his face, no satisfaction, no quiet revenge. There was only the tired, careful expression of a man who had already weighed too many of the world's small humiliations. She had to swallow once before she could speak. "I need you back." He did not answer. She forced herself to say the next part out loud, in front of the small girl who had every right to hate her. "Your suggestion. The mechanical kill switch. It's the only way to bring the car off the stage without somebody getting hurt. I'm asking you." Matilda stepped half behind her father's leg. She did not say anything. She remembered this woman. She remembered the laugh. Elias studied Serafina for a long moment. Then he asked the question that mattered. "Do you want me back because I was right? Or because you ran out of options?" She could have lied. A different woman, in a different decade of her own life, might have lied. She did not. "Both," she said. "I am sorry I didn't listen sooner. But there are people out there, and one of them is a child, and I don't have time to argue with what you think of me." Elias looked down at Matilda. His daughter was watching him with the same wide, serious eyes she had watched him with when he taught her how to tie her shoes. She tugged, very gently, on his sleeve. "Daddy, if you can help, we should help." He closed his eyes for just a second. Then he nodded. "Take me back," he said to Serafina. "And this time, when I speak, no one in that room interrupts me." She did not hesitate. She agreed before the sentence had finished landing. She turned and led him back down the long corridor. He followed, his daughter's hand still wrapped firmly inside his own. The control room fell silent the moment Elias walked through the door. Engineers who had spoken over him 40 minutes earlier could not bring themselves to look up now. Carter stood very still beside the main console, his face the color of old paper. Serafina followed Elias inside, and before he could be questioned by a single voice, she made her position clear. "From this moment," she said, "everyone in this room follows Mr. Parker's instructions." It was not a request. Elias did not waste a second on the silence she had created. He cut the stage music first, because he needed to hear the car. He told the audio engineer to keep the house lights up but kill the show lighting, so that nobody in the front row would be blinded if the vehicle moved. He told the stage manager to clear the first 3 rows of the audience under the pretext of a brief technical pause. No panic, no announcement of cause. He told 2 technicians to bring a manual tow strap and stand by the side ramp, but not, under any circumstance, to cut the main power. If you cut power now, he said, the battery will hard lock. We need the car at mechanical neutral before any electrical change. A senior engineer asked him how long it would take. Elias did not look up from the schematic he was already pulling toward himself. Less time than you wasted not listening to me. It was not arrogance. It was simply true. A junior technician swallowed audibly. Matilda was led to a small staff lounge by a woman from Human Resources, who gave her a juice box and sat with her. The girl held her blue toy car tightly and watched the door her father had walked through. Elias went down behind the stage. The space behind the rotating platform was tight, hot, and dim. The mechanical kill switch panel was exactly where the engineering schematic said it would be, except for one crucial detail. The set design team, in their effort to make the rear of the stage visually clean, had laid an ornamental panel directly over the access plate. To reach the switches, someone would have to remove that panel first. Carter, behind him, said in a small voice that they would need a specialty tool to take it off cleanly. Elias reached into the small canvas roll in his back pocket and pulled out a worn wrench, the same wrench his father had given him at 14. No, he said. We just need to know where it is. He worked the first lock loose. The car shuddered above them. From beyond the curtain, an audible gasp moved through the audience. Serafina, standing in the wings, held a junior assistant by the elbow to stop her from saying something that could not be unsaid. Elias asked a technician to angle a flashlight. He moved to the second lock. He told the man at the auxiliary panel to bring the control current down to its lowest stable setting, slowly, without cutting it. The technician obeyed. Above them, the prototype slid another inch. Somewhere, somehow, Matilda heard her father's voice through the walls and called out, "Daddy!" He heard her. He did not turn. He set his hands on the third lock, drew a single, even breath, and pulled. The wheels straightened. The car stopped sliding. It settled into mechanical neutral with a soft, almost grateful exhale. For half a second, no one in the building made a sound. Then, in waves, the audience began to breathe out. The applause that came afterward was confused, uncertain, and finally relieved. The technicians wheeled the prototype off the stage along the side ramp. No one was hurt. No one would forget. In the staff lounge, Matilda looked up as her father came through the door, and her small face crumpled with relief. He picked her up. He did not speak. He just held her. In the corridor, Serafina was waiting. She had, in the minutes between, made a decision. She did not pull Elias aside. She did not offer apology in private. When the team gathered in the back room 10 minutes later, with Carter present and the senior staff present and a board representative on a video call, she stood up and chose to be public. "I was wrong," she said. "I laughed at this man's suggestion because I looked at his title before I listened to what he knew. I did it in front of his daughter. I am sorry." Elias stood quietly. Then he answered, "You didn't just cost me a job today. You taught a 6-year-old girl to wonder whether people get to laugh at her father because he doesn't wear a suit. I'd rather not have to teach her the rest of that lesson." Serafina lowered her head. Carter, beside her, was instructed by silence to do the same. He apologized too. It was stiff. It was unwilling. It was given. Serafina offered Elias the role of Director of Operational Safety and Field Testing at Caldwell Motion Technologies. He did not answer right away. He asked instead whether the schedule would let him pick his daughter up from school. For the first time in any of their conversations, Serafina smiled. It was a small smile, and an honest one. "We'll arrange the schedule around her." A few weeks later, Elias walked through the lobby of the same building in the same kind of plain shirt he had always worn. The staff did not look at him as a contractor anymore. They did not look at him as a hero either. They simply nodded. the way one nods at a person whose presence has been earned. Matilda visited her father after school on a Friday afternoon. She set her blue toy car on the corner of his new desk, the way she always did. Serafina, passing by, paused in the doorway. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "would you like a brand new model car? I can have one sent over." Matilda considered the offer with the seriousness only a 6-year-old can summon. Then, she shook her head. "No thank you," she said. "This one reminds me of the day my daddy saved everybody." Serafina looked at Elias. She did not say anything for a long moment. There was respect in her face, and gratitude, and something younger than either of those, something she had not yet named. Elias smiled, just slightly, and went back to his work. And as Matilda took her father's hand and walked beside him through the bright glass lobby, Serafina Caldwell stood in the doorway and learned, finally, the thing that her education had never bothered to teach her. Real power was not the ability to silence a room. It was the wisdom to know when to listen.